Hey guys, Allison here. Well, we are celebrating Valentine's Day soon, and there's a big focus in February on romantic relationships. Now, let's face it, relationships can be tough for a lot of people, and sometimes it's even hard to find a good relationship. But why is that? Why do so many people struggle? At some point you fell in love and everything seemed wonderful, and yet it can be very, very difficult in a marriage or in a long term relationship. So let's look at what are some of the reasons people do struggle in relationships. First off, I think it's a lack of trust. It's very hard to trust another person, especially if we didn't experience, satisfying relationships in the past. People, let's say parents that we could trust to be there for us. Or maybe we got hurt in past relationships. So it's very, very hard to trust again. And that's understandable. And if you are in that situation, I encourage you to talk to a therapist, because sometimes, and I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, that their marriage failed, therefore never get married again. Marriage is bad. That was the problem. Somebody even said to me, "Oh no, I love him too much to ever marry him," because she'd been burned before in a marriage. And it makes me very sad, because marriage is a beautiful vocation. It really is very life-giving in very many ways, and yet we sometimes blame marriage as the problem and not really look at what went wrong in the relationship, what was wrong with me or the other person in the relationship, what were the dynamics. And I think it's always good to go back and look at past relationships to understand why they failed. A lot of times we don't get to know the person well enough, and we kind of rush into things. All right, the first 3 months of any relationship is kind of idyllic. It's wonderful. We don't see their faults. But as time goes on, and I think it's important to invest some time in any kind of relationship so that you know, what is this person like in different circumstances, among different people, with their family, with your friends. How do they treat insignificant people, the waiter, the busboy? As we start to spend more time, the act goes away and we start to see the real people. So that's one of the big problems. So I think that, like I said, number one, I think, is a lack of trust and sometimes not giving the other person a chance. Another thing that we find is that a lot of people had very poor examples. If you come from a broken home, or maybe you were in an intact family, but the relationship dynamics were very toxic. Maybe there was abuse in your family. It can be very hard to kind of open ourselves up or even know what goal we're shooting for in a relationship. So, I often think about back in the 40s and 50s, you could turn on a movie and see how couples related to one another, usually in a more healthy way. And now our society has kind of glorified dysfunction. So it's really hard. So to kind of look at maybe, my niece says something like relationship goals. When you see somebody with a really good marriage, study it. Look at them. What are the dynamics? What are the principles that you can start to discern that make that relationship work? A lot of the times also we find that people have a poor self-image, right? There might be early wounds, lack of affirmation growing up. So we don't really feel good about ourselves. So it's hard to really kind of let our guard down and be who we're supposed to be in a relationship. We have to be vulnerable. And that can be hard, especially if we have a poor self-image. We don't want anybody seeing that. We might hide it. But eventually it comes out when you're living with somebody. The real person starts to emerge. So we need to look at, what is my self-image? How do I really see myself? And if you have trouble with that, reach out to a friend or two. What are the qualities, good and bad, that they can say are prominent in your life? And you don't want to, obviously you don't want to get beat up with it, but maybe find a trusted friend. Say, listen, I'm really willing to listen. Tell me, how do you really see me? Because I think most people are going to be surprised that people see you in a better light than you might see yourself. Another thing is, sometimes if we've had traumatic experiences in the past, whether in relationships or other things too, it can really impact our ability to be in a relationship, to be vulnerable in a relationship. So if any of those above are your problems, this is where I think individual counseling is so important. Often I've had people call where they're looking for marriage counseling, but the spouse doesn't want to go. Go anyway, because there's so much benefit when you're working with a therapist, particularly a Catholic therapist, in terms of the interior work you can do on yourself, because we play off one another, right? But sometimes it's our own unresolved stuff that we need to look at. So I always encourage that. Another thing is sometimes we're not in touch with our own feelings and our own motivations. And part of that, I think, is the busyness. We're always so busy. And we're always like a lot of input, especially social media and music and TV and everything that's coming at us. We need to take time on a daily basis to reflect, all right, to have quiet time. If you're driving in the car, you don't need the radio on. Take time to think and reflect. What am I feeling? Like, why am I reacting to something? Why is something so important to me? What's my real motivation here? Because sometimes we don't realize, and we do things, or we kind of put pressure on a relationship because we're really not in touch with that stuff. Another problem, and for a lot of people, is a lack of emotional control. I mean, you probably know people, their emotions rule them. Maybe you're one of them, all right? Where when emotions get triggered, that's it. It's off to the races. And you can't reason with them, and you can't, really get kind of like an intellectual hold on it. Now, our emotions are meant to be guided by reason, right? Emotions give us good information about how we're feeling, or our feelings rise up spontaneously. So if somebody's, let's say, pushing a boundary, start to feel uncomfortable, we start to feel angry, we need to stop and think, okay, what's going on? What am I feeling here right now? And then how do I guide that by reason? All right, I can punch him in the face, or I can maybe move away. Or maybe I can excuse myself. Or maybe I could just say nicely, like, listen, you're kind of really in my space here. Would you mind backing up? All right, so we're guiding our emotions by reason. And that's pretty hard when we're really emotional. So when we are really emotional, don't take action. Calm down. Try to get a handle on it and kind of understand what emotions you're feeling, so that you can say, okay, now what do I do? What's the outcome I want? How can I express this so that I get what I want here, or correct whatever the situation is? Again, going to therapy and really working through those things, even spiritual direction can be very helpful sometimes in terms of kind of understanding our motivations or how God is working in our lives, right? The other thing I think that I see a lot, and I know this is for me, not understanding the opposite sex. Right? Women, we think that men think like we do, and men don't understand. I mean, women are so mysterious to men because they can't figure us out, right? And part of that is kind of fun, and part of that is kind of like, kind of the banter that goes back and forth in relationships. But it's really important to take some time to understand how men think, how women think, and I don't mean to be stereotypical, but we're different, all right? Men are more action-oriented, women are more thought and, kind of emotionally oriented. Men tend to like challenges, women tend to want to nurture. So really getting an understanding of the opposite sex. All right, there's a great book by Emerson Eggerichs, called Love and Respect, and a couple also by Shaunti, Feldhahn, and her husband. What do women want? What do men want? I think that's the title of them. But they're really good for understanding, because once we understand it, the things that might be annoying, we say, okay, well, they're just different. They're different than I am. And it's a beautiful difference. So I think that's important. Not specifically understanding your partner. A lot of people don't invest the time to really get to know their partner. And especially if you rush into a relationship very quickly, we don't take the time to really know who they are. What are their wounds? What are their disappointments in life? What are their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations? What is their typical way of responding to things? Or if they get upset, do they pull back, or do they go on the offense? It's important to really understand your partner, because everybody's an individual. And if we can understand that, we can work through problems much more effectively. The other thing I think that, the last thing, is poor communication skills. We really need to learn how to communicate clearly and toward a goal. And sometimes we don't communicate well because we let our emotions get in the way. So there's a lot of books you can read on communicating better. Again, it's Valentine's Day. We want to celebrate relationships. We want to be mindful of those who are struggling in relationships. And again, if you're really struggling because of, the early woundedness, poor examples, things like that, reach out to a Catholic therapist. And if some of this is just differences between you and your partner and communication, that's when marriage counseling can be really, really helpful. And I highly recommend it because you could really grow. There are so many people who walk away from marriages when there could have been some good resolution had they worked with a good Catholic marriage counseling. So I hope you find that really helpful. Happy Valentine's Day. God bless you.